Good luck.
Wonderful. First of all, thanks everybody who's watching. Thanks so much, PancakesCon, for having me. My name is Ryan Cohen, pronouns he, him. And before we get to the topic here, I'll just do a quick talk about me and my background. So I am not an information security professional per se. I've actually been doing software, product management in software for about 10 years now. And over the past few years, went to work for a government agency. And as it turns out, security is a really sort of pressing and urgent need when you're working in these kind of contexts. And so have really come to security through this whole DevSecOps practice. And understanding how these things interact and are kind of real pressing matters. So with that said, I have to give the usual disclaimer. I'm here today in my capacity as a private individual. Opinions expressed here are my own and do not reflect the opinions of my employer or anyone else, but especially not my employer. But what am I talking about? I'm talking about NFTs. And stay with me here. I promise you this has to do with security. So I'm going to talk about Bored Ape Yacht Club. Which is a non-fungible token, an NFT art project. The word art is doing a lot of heavy lifting here, deployed on the Ethereum blockchain. Now, if that sounds like nonsense to you, then I congratulate you. You probably have better mental health than I do. I'm not going to get into the workings of blockchain or any of that nonsense because it's not super salient here. The main thing to talk about here that I think is interesting is that this project was launched in 2021. It's owned by a private for-profit group called Yuga Labs, whatever. The main thing is that each NFT, each token is basically, it's a token on the blockchain that has a URL pointer to a really hideous monkey picture. Plus there's some metadata, but like mostly it's the ugly monkey picture. Now, what is the main, what makes this interesting? Well, what makes it interesting, what makes it relevant to security and why I think it's interesting to talk about here is that control of an Ethereum wallet, which means control of the NFT, is basically determined by ownership of a private key, right? So I imagine a lot of you have heard of, or understand the principles of, private key, public key cryptography. And really for those folks who aren't super familiar, the idea with a private key is that it's a secret, right? It's a random string of numbers and letters, and whoever knows that secret has full control of the wallet where these tokens are stored and controlled effectively. Now, so and this token is often stored on a person's computer. So and the private key, where this gets really spicy is the fact that because the way these contracts are programmed on the Ethereum blockchain, this one in particular, there's no do-backs, there's no go-backs. If you lose your private key and somebody finds that private key and then uses it to steal your ape, so to speak, to use that private key to control ownership of that token to a different address, it's game over. There's no way to get it back. So what happens then is that when you've got each token that, for whatever reason, is determined by the market to be worth around $100,000, right? 100,000 American dollars. You now basically have a situation where somebody has a private key that is worth $100,000. So this raises a really interesting question. So who's out there that is buying $100,000 monkey pictures, or is retaining control of 100, has made the choice to keep their $100,000 monkey picture instead of turning it into currency that you can use to, I don't know, feed your neighbors or buy useful things or buy a house or whatever else. And then also, who among that group has a really strong grasp on information security practices, including secure key management, right? Like the amount is not zero, but also the folks who are credulous enough to be, participating in the system are not necessarily also the folks who are really good on, have really excellent cyber hygiene. And so what's kind of the natural conclusion of that? Well, since 2021, since this thing launched, there have been about, 15 to $20 million worth of these tokens that have been stolen, right? Just straight up stolen. People can't recover them. Somebody gets the key, runs away with it, and then proceeds to launder it for, however much ETH or Bitcoin or American dollars or whatever the case may be. It's really endemic. So it's so common that it's become, a pretty common running joke in, crypto spaces, non-crypto spaces, just people talk about how it's just, people are getting their apes stolen left and right, and it really it happens quite frequently. And so then it creates this, like, for security, right? When we're talking about information security, it creates this really tight and neat correlation between, like, well, what happens if we mess up? What happens if we let information out that you shouldn't let out? Well, in a lot of corporate situations, like, well, user, privacy is compromised. Maybe that has an impact on the organization. There's a sort of a long series of events that has to happen between something going wrong and something, like, really bad happening. Ransomware tightened that up really quickly, right? If your border is not secure and somebody can get a shell on your system, then suddenly your system's, out of commission and you're being extorted, right? That tightened that loop. With NFTs, also, again, it's like, if you mess up, suddenly now, like, this as somebody who's holding that, you've just lost the equivalent of $100,000 or more, right? That causality of information security to material impact is really, really short. And so, and a lot of times, and why I think this is interesting to talk about, is that, like, these aren't really sophisticated, highly technical supply chain attacks where these guys, and I see these guys because they're mostly dudes, are getting their apes stolen. It's mostly phishing, and it's mostly really, really, really straightforward cyber hygiene, cybersecurity practices. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to walk through a few cases where people had their apes stolen, and just talk about what are some of the lessons that we can take away, and how can they reinforce some of the learnings and kind of some of the things that we know are common practice when we're talking about cybersecurity. In cyber hygiene, and how can we take these lessons and say, like, okay, how does this teach us? How does this reinforce what we already know, why it's really salient? And when it becomes really salient, when we're talking about living in a world with NFTs that are worth real money, or ransomware and all these other sorts of things. So the first case that I'm gonna go over here is a case where somebody got phished, fundamentally. A seed phrase is basically a human readable version of a private key. So this fellow was sent a link, opened it up, and put in their private key functionally. And so there's a really straightforward lesson here, which is you need to keep your private key private. You got to keep it private. If you have a private key, don't tell anybody what the private key is. You shouldn't. If you have, like, and this goes for basically any other kind of private key. If you're sharing your private key, that like, something has gone terribly wrong, and you shouldn't be doing that. If you have a hardware token, great. Keep that hardware token on, like, in a place where you can control it, right? Don't share it out. It's just like, when we're talking about private keys, again, the lesson here is it should be known to you and you alone. If somebody else needs to know it, there's probably a way that you can create a transaction or pass it along without exposing your private key itself, because it should, again, be a secret, right? We live in a world where secrets are it's really hard to keep secrets, but it's really important when it comes to information security, because the computer, it doesn't know the difference between you holding the private key and somebody else holding the private key. So keep your private key secret. Lesson number one. Here's another case where somebody who calls himself NFT God, I won't comment, had their apes stolen because they went and they clicked on a sponsored link in Google to download OBS software. Malvertising is super common now, and so what are some lessons that we can glean from this? There's actually a few different lessons we can glean from this. He downloaded a malware-infested copy of OBS from a bad link on Google. So what are the lessons we can take from this? One, use an ad blocker. Malvertising has gotten so bad that the FBI is putting out official recommendations to consumers to say, install an ad blocker. We don't care about Google's profits. We don't care about Facebook's profits. To protect yourself, install an ad blocker. I really like eBlock Origin. EFS Privacy Badger is also really excellent. Won't block ads necessarily, but like does a bunch of other things that stop tracking cookies and all the rest of it. And while we're talking about extensions that are really useful for protecting yourself online, HTTPS everywhere, again from EFF, super useful. Some folks are will say, oh, you don't need that anymore because HTTPS is almost everywhere by default, but it's not everywhere. And it's useful sometimes to have that note that says, hey, this is not TLS encrypted. You really should pay attention. So again, use an ad blocker. It's just there's, in the year 2023, there really isn't any good reason not to be using an ad blocker unless you're like working in marketing. You need to be able to see the ads on stuff. The other lesson here is that like you need to know where your sources are coming from, right? If you're downloading software and running it on a machine, you should know what it is. It should be reputable. You should know where it's coming from, if at all possible. If you can't, for whatever reason, you got to put that somewhere else, right? Like run it inside a VM, put it on a different machine. Don't install shady stuff that you don't know the origins of, especially if it has anything to do with cryptocurrency. There's just, like you can't even trust half the, or not half. There's a lot of apps, even in official stores, like the, Apple Play Store, the Android Play Store that, aren't necessarily trustworthy, right? so just be very cautious and careful about what it is that we're thinking about installing and where. For folks that are doing IT security in organizations, right? Like this is all about, program control and inventory control on the assets that are inside the organization. Again, none of the stuff is like all of this is the same kind of stuff that you'd see in a Sec Plus, cert course. Like it's kind of fundamental, but also like this is these are the building blocks that are, like by ignoring, people are run into real significant material harms. The other one is, compartmentalize, right? So this fellow goes and downloads a malware-infested version of OBS onto the same machine. This same machine is also the same machine that has a copy of their private key. That isn't necessary, right? Like there's, it's really important to compartmentalize, know what's running where, and then if you have anything that's sensitive, right? If you have bar of gold, don't put that bar of gold to the bottom of your laundry hamper, right? Like don't keep it in the pantry with your cereal, right? You put it somewhere safe. And the same thing here with digital assets, right? People just aren't thinking about it this way, but like you want to have separate users. If you can afford it, have separate hardware, right? Like there's virtual machines, you can separate your networks either using VLANs or using physical switches, right? You want to create a bifurcation of what's sensitive and needs to be protected versus, everything else, especially if we're talking about anything that's, could touch software that you don't know the provenance of or give yourself a mistake, right? Like you have to acknowledge that like nobody's going to be on 100% of the time, including yourself, and just, make it safe for things to go wrong if you can. Now, some folks may say, oh, well, this guy's machine was pwned, right? Somebody's got malware or root access in the machine. Like, well, they would have found the token anyway. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what's our threat model, right? And so, like, really, right, if you're thinking about this on the spectrum of like threat actors that could possibly be out to steal your private keys, for whatever reason, maybe, it's because of crypto, or maybe it's because you're holding private keys that like allow you to push code to your company, or, any of the reasons why you might have, or your PGP keys, like if you think about the wide spectrum of folks that are going to be out to get those keys, on one hand, we have, really sophisticated, really highly resourced actors like Lazarus Group operating out of North Korea, or any of the other APT organizations. On the other side, we have folks that, are, just doing it for a laugh, right? The kind of like, folks who maybe don't have a ton of, technical education, or experience and are just running scripts and doing stuff because it works. And then, but there's this big middle tier, right? And a lot of it is our people who are professional cyber criminals, right? 30-year-old dudes operating out of Eastern Europe who are doing it because it's their day job, right? They've, they're somewhere in the supply chain and they're out there running malware, running campaigns, and they're just looking for easy targets. And so, if you can engineer your network or your systems in such a way that you're protecting yourself from the bottom 80% of that bell curve, right? Where like, it's like the guy out of Latvia isn't going to spend 40, 60 hours like mapping through your network and like finding what other machines and then trying to tunnel into them and cracking that. Like they're just looking for easy threats. They're going to say, oh, they're going to run like Vidar Stealer, Raccoon Stealer on your machine, finds nothing, great, move on. Like they're not going to spend that much time on it probably, in which case you've done a good by just compartmentalizing and putting your key somewhere else that's not on the machine that's live with the malware. You've dodged a bullet, so to speak. If Lazarus is coming after your keys, like you're going to have a bad time. You don't want to make it easy for them, but like, acknowledging that's less likely, right? Going back to risk, probability versus consequence. or rather multiplying those, like the probability of Lazarus is coming after you specifically, depending on who you are and who you work for and what you're doing, may be more or less likely. And so, it's useful to say, like, I'm just going to make the basic, do the basic stuff that takes a little bit of effort, but, will save me 80% of the heartache down the road, or what is most likely to come my way. Here's another case. Again, same guy, right? So a series of mistakes here, right? One, clicked on a bad link. Could have prevented that in any number of ways. Even if he had clicked a bad link and downloaded bad software, could have protected himself in a few different ways. And then, but like the kicker here, again, he had a tool which will store a private key on what's called cold storage, or it's a hardware wallet, or really what it is it's a computer that holds the key offline, and which means that somebody can network into your machine. They can have root on all your systems, but like they're not going to have the private key because it's in this thing called a ledger or hardware wallet, right? And you just plug it in when you're actually doing a transaction, and it signs the transaction without moving the private key itself. He had the tool, like he had it, but he used it wrong, right? He used it in a way that put the private key on his machine, which defeats the entire purpose. And so this brings us to the next lesson, which is like, you can have all the tools in the world, you can have the best tools in the world, but if you don't have, if you're operating yourself and you don't take the time to learn how to use them, or take the time to set them up correctly and actually utilize them, they might as well be worthless. Like that, you might as well not have the tool. And this, for organizations, it's the same thing. You can have all the tools, but if people either don't know how to use them well, or don't have the time and focus to be able to use them correctly, then like they might as well not have them. And this is, I think, a really important lesson for everybody, really. Moving on to a third case. So again, a lot of phishing, right? A lot of cases where people are signing transactions that they probably shouldn't. And this comes in, and one of the reasons why these phishing attacks are so successful is because the UX in crypto broadly is absolutely horrendous. Like if you look at this, this is typically what a hardware wallet, not a hardware wallet. This is what what a transaction looks like. It's got a message with some really arcane stuff. It's got some numbers, a thing called a nonce. Like what is like to? I've been dabbling in the space for years, and I still couldn't tell you what this is. And somebody who's just coming into this space, or somebody who's just started paying attention, or who just isn't technical, like this is absolute nonsense to them. It doesn't mean anything. And there's groups out there who are trying to improve the UX inside the space, but like it really emphasizes how important user experience really, really is in software generally, right? Like computers are complicated, networks are complicated, everything's super complicated, and UX, it allows us to abstract a lot of that complexity and to tell users what they need to know with their limited cognition, like just in that moment, like they're making a choice. It's like, hey, you can just tell them like let them understand and bring their attention to what is important. What are the consequences of doing this? When you click this button, what's going to happen? Is what they're trying to do dangerous? Is it unusual? Flag that. Is it routine? Okay. Right. And so like one of the reasons why a lot of this, like why we've had, millions of dollars in losses in a lot of spaces, because the UX is absolutely horrendous, and nobody knows, kind of like, even when you know what you're doing, you're still kind of like, well, is this a valid transaction? Is it not a valid transaction? Like the UX just hasn't gotten to a point, and people just haven't, like a lot of the groups just haven't put enough time and energy, or even have the understanding of like how to design UX in a way that like makes it legible to like the vast majority of humanity, instead of like the Vitalik Buterins of the world. So UX, super, super, super important, like in basically everything to do with software. UX, I think, is it's part of the triad of engineering, management, product, and like the design. Like it's all, these are all things that matter a lot when we need to make things safe for people to use. A couple more cases left here. Case number 4 is where the actual Yuga Labs, the people who are behind Bored Ape Yacht Club, get hacked constantly. So in this case, they had access to the Discord hacked. They had access to their Instagram hacked, which created a massive platform that these exploiters could use to basically drop malicious links, invite people to sign transactions they shouldn't, and then steal several $100,000 millions of dollars more of these hideous ape tokens. And the lesson here really is that the system is only as secure as the admins. The vast majority, according to CrowdStrike's recent report, the vast majority of attacks now are happening without malware even, right? They're all happening, mostly through like finding and then abusing credentials. So either brute forcing them, finding them on, have I been pwned, and then cracking those or whatever else, but they're social engineering. A lot of attackers now are just finding the logins and then just using the logins. Again, like a lot of these attacks are not technically incredibly sophisticated. They're just very effective because of the shortfallings in the space, and because a lot of what security comes down to is like it's the thing of identity. If you can impersonate someone effectively by having their credentials a lot of the time, you could do an incredible amount of damage. And then again, the folks behind who are running the organization, get compromised constantly. And in this case, it wasn't just the login; it was a webhook. I don't know the specific details of whether there was an exploit for the webhook or somebody just found another login credential again. But the highlight here, I think, that's worth calling out is that the threats don't stop at your security boundary, right? Like you can have all of your systems and all of your networks, buttoned up super, super tight. But if you're relying on outside organizations, if you're relying on Discord, or, if you're, a corporate organization, if you're relying on Slack or, any of these other tools that live outside of your networks, those are now vulnerability points that you have to be concerned about. A lot of organizations will solve that problem by just taking and hosting everything inside, or putting everything in the cloud where, presumably Amazon or Microsoft will do a really good job of defending it. And then you need to be worried about your configurations, et cetera, et cetera. But like what we're seeing a lot of times also now is like, you're not even just, your stuff can be safe, but if stuff that feeds into your systems, right, through supply chains, through business processes, through whatever else, like those create those are a really important part of your attack surface that need to be considered, addressed, and it's really challenging, right? Because you're at least when you're talking about software that's running on machines that are within your security boundary, that's stuff that your organization or you can address because you have the sort of authority and access to do it. You're not going to be able to necessarily reach into Slack, like Slack's security boundary and be like, hey, we need to update your process here because of X, Y, or Z, right? So like it's frustrating to have to rely on some of these outside organizations. But this is a thing that like folks need to be cognizant of and really consider, because it creates serious vulnerabilities for yourselves, for your organization, for everything else. So that's the end of my first half of the talk. My consideration of bored apes. I will next be talking about the other kind of bored ape in my life, which is my kids and all of the television that we have been watching together. I'm going to take a moment to take a drink of water. And Alan, do you want to do some questions in the first half or save it to all the way at the end?
Up to you. So there haven't been any questions. There's just been a lot of talk about ad blockers.
Okay.
That's something that seemed to make people a bit excited. But yeah,
Okay.
generally the agreement is that uBlock Origin is the only one that you should really take a look at. For myself, I like the idea that you were talking about the user experience or UX, because that is something that generally security people, we don't really look at all of these other little things that are supposed to be taken taken care of by other parts of the organization, but they definitely do impact on the security experience. And yeah, absolutely, I particularly like that. Yeah, I think let's jump into the second bit, and I'll see if I can get some more questions for you while you're going through that.
Okay,
Thank you
excellent.
very much.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about early childhood television programming. And so why am I talking about this? Here's the context. These are my two beautiful children, ages 4 and 1. They have their mother's eyes. I love them dearly, and through absolutely no fault of their own, they're driving me to an early grave. One of the things that's super hard about being a parent with young kids is that it's just like a really impossible labor problem, because like taking care of them means that you're not like doing other things you need to do, like cleaning the house, doing the dishes, doing the laundry, taking care of that other stuff. And so that's where screen time comes in, right? Like if I can park my 4-year-old in front of the TV and run some Daniel Tiger, that is 15 to 20 minutes that I can take to then like do the laundry, to do any of the 500 other things that needs to happen when we're kind of just trying to run the household, on top of taking care of the kids and working full-time jobs and everything else. So in all of that, right, like I have I have been exposed to a lot of childhood TV, right, like a lot of shows that like I would just never be exposed to otherwise in my life. And throughout all of this, I have come to get a sincere appreciation for some of them, and I have come to really develop a strong animosity towards some other shows. And so that's what led me to think about this talk, which is, I'd like to walk through a tier list, right? What are the ones that I think are interesting and good, and what are the ones that I think are maybe terrible, and opine on some of the differences, that we see. Before I kick off on the tier list, a couple observations that I've noticed. What's really interesting is like, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and the quality of the children's programming that's available today is just like so much better. It's really incredible how much better, like just like A, how much of it is, B, like thanks to streaming, how much is just available without advertising, which is fantastic. And then also just like general quality, right? Like it's just really good. And it, people are clearly out there spending a lot of time and creating a lot of thought and like creating like real art that like, addresses children's needs and helps them develop. The other observation is that CGI sucks. It was a mistake. There's so much stuff that's out there that's CGI, and it's just hideous. Maybe this is like an old man yelling at cloud moment, but just like, I appreciate good CGI as much as the next person, but like there's a lot of really bad CGI, and I think it's demonstrably worse than like the equivalent in hand drawn or cel shaded stuff. But that's my opinion. A couple other things that have changed that I think is really interesting. The diversity of characters that's available in the programming today is so much better than it was, 20, 30 years ago. I'm calling out 1980 Sesame Street here because almost every single character on Sesame Street and in the Muppets is a boy for some reason, right? It's like a lot of male puppeteers. Jim Henson, like built 6-foot stages so that like most women like just couldn't physically do the puppeteering at the time. Like there's a lot of reasons for it, and none of them are particularly good. But like that's changed, right? That's, we're now seeing a lot of characters that are, like girls or women in leading roles, a lot of characters like of color, right? Like it's changed significantly, and I think that's really awesome for, kind of like our society at large. Still a lot of room to improve. The formula used to be back in the day, like this is a, superhero team of all dudes, which is bad, obviously. But now it's like, great, we have a team of 3, and it's 2 boys and a girl. And this, like, it's strange to me how often this pattern shows up, because there's no particular reason why this would be the case. Like, as far as even like source material or, anything else that's in there, but like, it's really, really common. And I'll point it out as we go through the list here. but it's like very common this happens. The other thing is that, like, even though we're seeing more diverse characters, there's like the patriarchy is still alive and well, and like white supremacy still expresses itself, either subtly or not so subtly in how these characters interact with each other. A lot of times, like in that trio that's in the character lineup, they'll have a blonde hair, blue-eyed white kid, and they're the one who like gets to fly the ship, or they're the one who's like the leader, or they're the one who like gets a lot of like screen time. And it's like, again, like, why? Doesn't need to be that way. Real quick, talk about the tiers in the tier list. S tier is so good, I would just watch it on my own time. Like, I was surprised that there's anything out there that's like this, but there is. A tier, great. B tier, good. It's fine. Happy to have it on. C tier, I'd really rather not, but if the kids want to watch it, great. F tier, I don't want to show it. Not allowed in the house. Like, we don't show that. So, and like, what am I judging this on, right? How do we place them into the tiers? Here are the 5 things that I care about, or rather cared about when I was making this tier list. One, how watchable is it? Right? Like, how much if I'm like trying to do work on the couch next to my kid, or if I'm doing dishes and I have to listen to it while it's going on, like how entertaining or watchable is that? Like, how much the general quality of writing or whatever else. 2, like, is it actually teaching my kids anything? Right? Like, if they're going to be engaged with something, I'd like them to be exposed to new concepts or cultures or ideas, or like principles of how our world works, or things that are interesting or fantastical, right? Like, how much, like, do I feel like there's any kind of value there in terms of the content? 3, diversity of characters. I think it's important for my kids to be exposed to the idea that like there are people in the world that don't necessarily look like them or talk like them. So I think that's valuable. And I think, I have a daughter as well, and I think it's really important for, her to have representation and see that, girls are out there like doing, cool stuff and being leads in these programs. The 4th one is like, did this give my kid nightmares? Sleep is really, really precious around here with 2 young kids. And so if my 4-year-old wakes up because they're scared in the middle of the night because they watched a show that had some scary stuff in it, that is an automatic disqualification. Like, just no good reason for it. And the last thing is like the intro music and the jingles and a lot of this stuff, it's very, very catchy. And sometimes it's a bad combination of very catchy and also horrible. It's catchy and it's in my head and I don't want to hear it. I have had the Muppet Babies theme in my head since noon today, and I haven't watched Muppet Babies in like a month. But just looking at the picture of Muppet Babies, I can hear it in my head, and it makes me want to join a monastery and take a vow of silence and never have to contemplate it again. It's just like, folks who are out there who have young kids, like, I have to imagine like you experience this as well. The psychic damage is real. So, all right, we have Alan, about 20 minutes now on the clock, 15?
Yeah, about that. It's actually closer to 10, but yeah, it's
Okay,
about 10,
all right.
15. Yeah.
All right, we're going to blast through these then. Ada to a Scientist. It's a young woman of color who's a scientist. Awesome. The actual way that they present like the scientific method is sometimes a little hit or miss. Sometimes it's not actually like the scientific method, even though they're calling it a hypothesis. But great representation. It's a solid B. It's fine. Blue's Clues. Blue's Clues is really solid. It like teaches basic concepts that young preschoolers find useful. It's engaging. My kid loves Steve. The music is too. It's too. The male song and everything else. It really gets in there. So it's gonna be a solid B. Bluey. It is hard for me to understate how much I appreciate this show. Bluey is it's heartfelt. The animation is absolutely gorgeous. It's genuinely funny. I have cried laughing. I have cried crying. Like, it's just such a joyful and true kind of representation of like what being a parent is and having young kids, and like everything that's like so joyful about that, but also so challenging in a way that's really, really heartfelt. And like, it's absolutely amazing. And it's absolutely hysterical. S tier. It's the spoilers. It's the only one in this list that I would call S tier. I have sat down and watched this at the end of the day because it's short and it's really just wonderful. If you haven't seen Bluey, I would highly recommend going and watching an episode or two. It's so funny, especially if you have young kids. Care Bears and Cousins. This show is it like I don't really like this show that much. There's one character, like a lot of the conflict in the show, like the plots are really anxiety inducing, people like being late for things, people not being able to focus on stuff. Like I'm pretty sure one character just has ADHD and like that's where a bunch of the conflict comes from, and it's not pleasant. There's also a whole like metaphysics of the Care Bear universe that like is just there and not even explained a little bit, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense, and it's just like, well, I don't know, it's not great. Chip 'n Dale Park Life. This show is actually, like, in a vacuum, really excellent. I would highly recommend it. Like they do with absolutely zero dialogue. This show does a really good job of establishing characters, establishing stakes, right? Like escalating stakes. It has a whole plot, like really tremendous storytelling. Given that it's a show about like two chipmunks and like, it's just a, funny cartoon. The thing is that it has a TV7 warning, and I ignored that to my peril because I thought, it's Chip 'n Dale, right? Like, surely my child will love this. No, that was a bad choice. It has characters that are in peril and like have really exaggerated fear reactions, and my child woke up having nightmares for several days while we were watching this, and it took me a while to figure out what was going on. Then I realized that I had made a big mistake, and so that's why this is F tier. Curious George, it's fine. Some really strange choices were made in this adaptation. For some reason, the man in the yellow hat lives in a downtown New York high-rise apartment. I don't know why, but somebody decided that was important. It's fine. It's a B. Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood. This is really nice. Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood is really nice. It's like of the shows that like does a very good job of like helping preschoolers like grapple with the challenges of being a tiny human in like a really big world, right? Like where you have to like go potty and do all these things and all the rest of it, right? Like Daniel Tiger does a really good job of introducing those things, making them seem, safe and doable and encouraging, and the jingles are like genuinely useful. It's like you can sing the little song and my kids will be like, oh, it's time to, do the thing that, like it's time to leave the park. It's time to do the thing. Like, love the show. Super helpful. Great. 8's here. Dinosaur Train. The character design, this is, I would say, a really good example of really hideous CGI. Like these characters are like, this is like Friday Nights at Freddy's stuff. Like if you were trying to design a character to look awful, like you'd go to Dinosaur Train. Like this is, I don't understand it. It's also like they're trying to teach the audience about dinosaurs, but it doesn't really come across in a way that I think is useful. And why are we gendering the dinosaurs with giant eyelashes? It just seems gratuitous. Solid C. Little Einsteins is the most bourgeois child show that I could possibly imagine. It's like we're going to educate our kids about like classical art and classical music. It's like if like Niles and Fraser Crane from the show Frasier had been put in charge of producing a television show. Like I mean, sure, guys, like, why not? Okay, yeah. But, it's fine. It's fine. This is another really good example of, like, you have, like, the one white kid, and he gets to be the pilot of the rocket ship. The rocket ship doesn't even need a pilot. It's actually fully sapient and can fly itself. But, like, sure, the white kid gets to fly it. Why? All right, fine. If you give a mouse a cookie, mega points on this one for preserving the actual original style of the books. Like it's just a delight to watch. So 8's here. Go Dog Go. It's fine. It's set in Boston, which sure, yeah. This one is an absolute fever dream of a show. I would love to have been in the pitch room when they were pitching Mecha Builders. It's like you've got Elmo and Abby and Cookie Monster, and for some reason they're robots, and for some reason they can shrink or they can get big, super big, but only for a limited time. Like it's it's Ultraman or something, and it's like, and they solve problems using like engineering, and it's like what? It's just an absolute fever dream of a show, and it's like it's just unnecessary and just very silly. Feels like somebody was just like, you know what we can sell? Action figures of Muppets because they're robots and kids love, like, come on, guys. Molly Denali, Native American rap, super cool, Native Alaska, and also technical literacy, like how to use search engines and how to like send emails and stuff. I don't know why they decided to include that in this show, but like, great. Like I don't see any other shows doing that. So like a solid A. Muppet Babies. The gender imbalance here in the Muppets really shows up. They had to invent a whole character out of whole cloth here, Summer Penguin, and like the gender balance is on the show is still terrible. Like it's 4-1, like unnecessary. The show is fine. The music is absolute earworm and not fun to listen to, so that gives it a B. Paw Patrol, F tier. Moving on. Miche Masks, C tier. It's, this is one of these shows where like the budget, it's CGI and somebody clearly has a cap budget and they spend some budget building a set and then they film everything in that set in the CGI world. And it's like, you can tell when they like moved to the next season and could afford to build like an extra set in the CGI. And, I don't just super love the superhero shtick, frankly. Tigger and Pooh, Sonny the Pooh, it's fine, B tier. Puff and Rock, set on an Irish island with an Irish cast. It's so gentle. It's gorgeously animated, gorgeous narration. It's novel. All the characters are just a delight to like see on the screen. A tier. I really like this one. Puppy Dog Pals. Really frenetic animation and really frenetic music. And, at this point, I'm thinking like, hey, Trappist monks are pretty cool, right? They get to make stuff. That's interesting. C tier. HBO. I'm just going to blaze through the last three here. HBO is like, they have more money than Croesus, and yet like they're still recycling content for Sesame Street. B tier. Spidey, it's like the problem with Marvel and trying to do a child's Marvel stuff. It's like they're violent. They solve their problems through violence almost every single time, but you can't be too violent on a show for preschoolers. So they do this weird thing where they do like, sticky goo shoots and the Hulk does a wind blast with his hands and all the rest of it. But it's like they're still fighting guys. So feels like there could be a better way of doing it. Cool character design, cool animation, CGI in a way that I would argue is done really, really well. Minus points for the fact that, again, it's the 2 boys, 1 girl formula. Again, unnecessary. Like, why was that the choice? But, still worth doing. Of the Thomases, I would say this one's the best. It's fine. Tumbleleaf. Tumbleleaf is really excellent. It's stop motion in like the 2020s. That's like just amazingly done. Really, really excellent. This one starts off with an episode that is weirdly scary and about the movies, which has, I'm pretty sure, is postdates Winnie the Pooh by quite a lot. So no good. Gave my kid nightmares. Moving on. And here's the full tier list if anybody's curious. And that's the end of my talk. And I hope I am not too much over time. If you have anything that you'd like to tell me, if I'm wrong or if you have questions or just want to reach out, I'm on Proton Mail. Here's my name. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching and listening.
Thank you very much. That was excellent. And it's good to see that my home country, Australia, is at the top of that list. Blue is really excellent. My kids love it and they're in their 20s. So yeah. There's not much time for questions. I'm just going to ask you one question from the ones that I did get. What is your favorite childhood character?
From my childhood or from this list?
From your childhood.
Oh. I'm going to go, so Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers from the 90s, right? In that kind of whole Darkwing Duck era. Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, they could talk. They went on adventures. One of them had a really snappy bomber jacket. I'm gonna go with I think it's, I can never remember which is the serious one and which is the silly one, but the one with the bomber jacket, I think that's Chip, maybe, or Dale, one of them. I'll do a duo, Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers.